All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Rethinking Wellbeing in Schools webinar hosted by HundrED and IB. My name is Jamie Lee, and I am the Education Design Specialist at HundrED, and I will be your host for today. So this webinar today is to launch the Spotlight Report project that we conducted in collaboration with IB, which is a research project that aimed to look for education innovations working on well-being in schools. And today we will be joined by some of the superstar innovators who were selected for this Spotlight project out of over 326 innovations that were submitted. These innovators are using different approaches to prioritize well-being schools in a variety of contexts. So a few housekeeping items before we get started. This webinar will be recorded, so don't worry if you miss any part of it, and the recording will be published on our event page a few days after the event. Also, we will have a little bit of time for Q&A at the end of each panel. So feel free to put your questions in the chat so that we can have a discussion. So I can bring your questions to the panel discussion. But also we have HundrED team members that are in the chat, so they can also answer your questions there. All right, so before I start with the panel discussions, I would like to introduce Olli-Pekka Heinonen, who is the Director General of the International Baccalaureate, who will explain IB's interest in this topic. And then I will pass it on to Anina, HundrED's Content Director, who will take over and facilitate the panel discussion. So welcome, Olli-Pekka.
Thank you so much, Jamie, and really great to be here. IB, International Baccalaureate, is very interested to hear what the superstars of and experts of student and teacher well-being are capable to tell us today from their own experiences. We from the IB side, we take part in this event and have interest in this topic from 3 different roles. And the first role is that, like today, we're here sitting on the learner seat. We want to learn as an organization from the practices that have been created closest where the learning happens and where the well-being of students and teachers is at stake. Secondly, we're interested, of course, through that learning, to be capable of share that kind of information to all IB schools, not to try to scale the outcomes, but to share the process that has led to good outcomes with different schools and the innovations that we will be hearing. And thirdly, there is strong interest from our side to also learn that what are the things that could and should be implemented in our educational programs. What are the things that, for example, should be included in our curricular thinking or our program standard and practices, our policies, our school culture guidelines. So those are the roles that we are here and for, and I'm all ears to listen to great presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, Olli-Pekka, for that great introduction. Now I'm really excited to introduce the panel discussion. Anina will be facilitating these panel discussions. The first panel features 3 innovators working in Uganda, Botswana, and Malawi, where well-being and education is not often discussed. So I'm looking forward to hearing about how these organizations have managed to successfully make well-being more of a priority in their context. Over to you, Anina.
Thank you, Jamie, and super excited to see that there are so many of us here today. My name is Ondine, and I will host the first panel discussion titled Redefining Wellbeing. How can we take well-being not as an afterthought, but as a foundation for learning, no matter what's the context? So I have a great honor to hear thoughts from our brilliant innovators who were selected for this spotlight on student well-being. And I'd like to welcome Priyanka Ram from Learn to Play, Navya Akkinepally from Learning Equality, and Harold Kuombola from Link Community. Are you all? Yay, I can see you here. Super. Before we jump deeper into the topic, I'd love you to introduce yourself by telling what has been the kindest thing you've done to yourself and your well-being today. So I see you, Priyanka, smiling. Sorry for the surprise. So if you don't mind going first, and maybe Navya, you'll follow, and then Harold, you're last.
Sure. I had to travel this morning a really long distance. So I'm actually in the middle of nowhere in Botswana. But the kindest thing I did for myself this morning was make myself a beautifully brewed cup of Indian spiced chai. So that was my self-care this morning before I left.
Sounds delicious. Navya, you?
Yeah, so it's very early. My day started off really early today, but I made a point to spend 2 minutes also making myself warm honey ginger tea, and that really helped me to get started for the day, and I feel energized right now.
Yeah, so for me, over the last weeks, I find myself sitting long hours. So yes, this week I've learned to do yoga in the morning. So one of the first things I did this morning was to practice stretches. So I just learned a few yoga exercises and I'm loving them already. So yeah, I exercise for my well-being as a person.
Awesome. Good for you. So, of course, we all know that in order to care for other people's well-being, we have to take care of ourselves first, particularly as adults when we take care of students. So with this, I'd love us to dive deeper into the actual term, the well-being. So how is well-being understood in your context? And what kind of challenges do you face when you're prioritizing well-being in education? I was wondering, Navya, could you go first? And then I'll let you flow free after that.
Yeah, for sure. So I think one of the biggest things that we see overall in the context that we work in, and particularly in Uganda, where the Flying Colors program is being implemented, is there is often not many conversations around what well-being even is, and even defining well-being in the schools and with the learners and the teachers in the first place. I think there's a really big gap in even starting the conversation and thinking beyond academics, thinking beyond day-to-day going to school, doing the math lesson, during the English lesson, finish, go home. I think there's just never intention and thought because there's so much going on even in school. The teachers are overburdened with large class sizes. There's a lot of planning that needs to happen in order to cater to the curriculum, making sure they're finishing the lessons in time. And often well-being is not a core component of any program in general. And with traditional academic pressures, with limited resources, not having access to resources and teacher preparation materials on how they can even integrate well-being inside the classrooms, that's often a challenge that we see overall. And cultural and systemic barriers where it's not recognized as a critical component of education in the first place, where it makes advocacy and implementation more difficult because there's a big mindset shift and addressing the gaps that need to happen in terms of making sure that teachers and learners are both at the center of these conversations and involving them in co-design process in terms of prioritizing what their needs are, meeting where the teachers are at and what the learners are at. So the challenges overall really are, I think, widened by not including them in a lot of these conversations in the first place.
Priyanka, Harold, did this brought up any similarities or differences in your experience?
Yes, so
Go ahead.
all right, yeah. So for us, I think there are a lot of similarities. And when you look at well-being in schools, there are overcrowded schools, obviously, with fewer teachers. When you look at the pupil-teacher ratio, it's always very high. Oftentimes, the curriculum is the priority, and they look to go through the curriculum. And when you look at even the student contact time is less, and more so well-being gets to be pushed down the priority list within that limited time that they have within the school calendar. And when we look at the environments, mostly it's around understanding or taking it from this point of strengthening social skills, kind of equating well-being to around social skills, looking at what subjects have been taught in the curriculum, life studies, life skills, social studies, and looking at those to infuse well-being. But taking it beyond academics and understanding the person and learning both for the person in school, out of school, community. That linkage needs more time, and in already resource-constrained environments, it's a bit challenging. When we also moved in, one of the things we noted was around institutionalization. What systems, curriculums are followed to build learner well-being, and how are those resourced and factored in and supported across the systems? Not only in terms of material resources, but also in terms of knowledge resources for both the teachers themselves, but also the middle managers to support in building that well-being systems for learners. So we supported a number of things in terms of skills development, infrastructure development at the school to provide practicing on skills, robust implementation systems, but also even monitoring and checking what is changing. We building the well-being status that we would want. How do we know, and how do we move from stage A to stage B in building that skills? Yeah, that resonates a lot with what we have also experienced in our case.
Very good. Priyanka, any thoughts on the challenges and how you, maybe practical examples also, how you've overcome them?
Yeah, I mean, I can resonate a lot with both. And I think, we're all working in kind of low resourced contexts, in sub-Saharan Africa. So it's quite similar. But I think I've got a story that kind of exemplifies the traditional and cultural mindsets that is our biggest challenge that we face, I think, more than anything else systemic. I think that's the biggest one. And when the day that we launched our playgroup in the Dukwi refugee camp in the center of Botswana, we held an information session for parents. And so after talking a little bit about enrolling and what this would look like, I asked the question of, what else can we do to foster your child's happiness at the playgroup? And there was this stunned silence across the room. And eventually, and I think this is, the part that I love most, it was a father that spoke up, not even a mom, that said, "You're the first person, I've been in this refugee camp for 20 years, and you're the first person to ask us what our child needs to be happy. Many organizations, UN agencies, health organizations will come in and ask about food, shelter, protection, as they rightfully should. But in 20 years, not one person had asked about joy, belonging, emotional security." And I think that moment shifted perspectives, that happiness is not a luxury. It's not secondary to survival. It's absolutely essential for children and families to feel safe, to be protected, to have that safety around them is their happiness first. And so, and even to learn. And so that was the perspective shift that we took. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we have in our context, along with, the limited awareness and the economic pressures and resource constraints that Navya and Harold have spoken about. We face those same challenges. But I think that traditional understanding that well-being is about safety and survival, food and shelter protection, whereas emotional and psychological well-being are seen as secondary. And so that perspective shift, and the only way that we've found to overcome it is by demonstrating it. So everything about all our sessions with parents, educators, and children alike are experiential. When we want to talk about mindfulness or play or well-being, we make sure that it's not a panel, it's not a lecture, it's not it's a workshop, and it's immersive. And by the end of that 1 hour, 3 hours, 5 hours, however long we have with them, the participants leave having experienced positive well-being in that moment, at least. And that's how we're trying to shift that understanding.
Wonderful, wonderful. I have an additional question, like if you could change the way we as a global community understand and maybe define also well-being, student well-being or youth, children well-being, the well-being of young people, what would you change? Like now reflecting on your work in the local communities.
I think the first thing that I would say is well-being is not separate from learning. Sorry, and that's the biggest shift that I would look at it is like when we're talking about academics and school and just to really shift that global language that. You know, when I was a teacher in schools in the UK, we had PSHE, which was like personal social health education, and it was a subject taught for 30 minutes. And it's, you know, and actually that's still traditionally the way that it is in many schools and many curricula and many components. It's separate to academics. It's this little 30-minute slot to tick a box that we've done it in the week. And I think that's the global shift that I think we really need to make a kind of widespread change, that well-being is the foundation of all learning, not a separate 30-minute lesson you do.
Yes, and a huge +1 to what Priyanka just shared. I was going to say the almost exact same thing. I think the shift to what student-centered learning can look like and feel like, and really prioritizing the needs of every single learner and also every single teacher is so important and critical. And if we were to redefine what it means to have well-being inside the classroom, what does it mean to the point that Priyanka was making earlier, what does it mean to bring joyful learning experiences? What does it mean to have meaningful engagement with the topics and the areas and the academics that learners are engaging with on the daily, if it's an afterthought or if it's just an additional add-on and it's not holistically integrated into the day-to-day and the lesson, each lesson that the learner is engaging with, then it becomes again, something that is deprioritized or something that doesn't fit into the curriculum or something that is not put at the center of what a lesson can look like and should feel like as well. So yeah, huge +1 to that.
Thank you. And now when we are in this 30-minute panel, this super tightly scheduled discussion, can I hear your thoughts on how we can get this, how we can get well-being at the center, at the core of education? And again, like you can use local examples. Harold, sorry, I cut you off. So if you want to add on to the previous comments, go.
Yeah, I'll also add to the point you are just making. I think for us, one of the things we did was to contextualize and learn from the target population. We took time to go in and understand why do you need well-being, firstly, and how can we do it better? So when we went in with our thoughts, it was around curriculum and so on, teacher pedagogy, the people actually came about with sports. They said, for us, we can use the sports. So we came back and reviewed sports for change concept. We went back to the community and discussed how can we do sports. They came up with netball, you know. And then after netball, we came in, we started looking at netball. Then we realized, oh, we need to adapt for inclusivity. There are other people, we are leaving out those who can't play sports. So we came back to adapt sports and now to do indigenous games, local games played in that community. Now we would listen to the songs, you know, songs they do as they play their games, transform those songs to decision-making and questions, then straight it into a learning part. Ask the learner to go back home, research on that song, research on that theme, and then come back tomorrow and build another part of the song based on that learning. So we contextualized it in that way. So it was learning through netball, and we merged with netball skills, which is what they chose. Those who couldn't play netball, indigenous games. So one of the things needed to bring this up front, not as an afterthought, is to look at situating it and contextualizing it, building it within the systems, within the curriculum. And one of the points Priyanka mentioned, I think, if not Navya, was around moving beyond academics, looking at it as a way of life. When we talk of sustainable development goals, learning for life, it should be lifelong learning. And this is one of the requirements we would need. But the key to it is around who drives how well-being should be delivered at that context. So listening to the views of the community and adapting and learning with them is one of the things we build in our program.
I love your creative and grown-up or Yeah, grassroots approach, super impressive. Navya and Priyanka, do you have any quick thoughts to add how we get well-being at the core of education?
And I can also share an example from our own program. I think something that we heard a lot when we were conceptualizing the program itself was we were focused on building foundational skills because we recognize 7 out of 10 learners globally cannot read a simple paragraph by the age of 10. And there's also a really big need to address the foundational literacy and numeracy gaps in this age group, in the particular context that we work in. And what we did that through was through a project-based learning approach where learners could have meaningful engagement with literacy and numeracy and connect that learning back to their home, to their caregivers, to the environment, to the community that they're a part of. And a critical component of that was also ensuring that there's social emotional learning components throughout the whole lesson in the beginning, middle, and end, and that it's aligned to the local curriculum standards. And what we've always heard is, how do you do project-based learning with foundational literacy and numeracy? How does that even work? Project-based learning is for more advanced learners in higher grades. But I think what we clearly saw is learners that when you have meaningful engagement with academic material, even if it's through a project-based learning approach or other approaches, and if there are social emotional learning activities woven throughout, it leads to stronger academic outcomes as well. We saw learners who were at the beginning of the program who couldn't read a simple word. At the end of 12 weeks, they could read a full paragraph. They could meaningfully engage with the text, and also created projects which were important for their community, like setting up a local garden in the school, thinking about what vegetables to grow that can grow in their particular village or in their community. And I think that's what well-being even does, because it pushes learners to be motivated, to think creatively, to really connect what they're learning to their communities and how they can transform their communities. And that is something that sets us up for success for the future generations as well. If that's not a priority right now, we will continue on with not addressing the big learning gaps and see what we've seen for decades now as well. And I think this is an approach that is critical for us to think about how we re-envision learning and what academic outcomes can be defined as well.
Thank you so much. And I love that addition that academic results are highly connected with this work. I now see that Rashmi has joined us. So we have a question from a youth ambassador, Rashmi Nar from India. Go ahead, Rashmi.
Hi, just a quick question. Do you mind turning on my video real quick? I'd like to interact with everyone over video too. Right. Hi, everyone. I'm Rashmi, and I'm a student of MYP4 from Pathway School, Noida. So I'm in India, and it's lovely to be seeing everyone over here. I've read a lot about your innovations, and I think they're really cool. The way that you're able to involve well-being in schools. I think that well-being is a really important part of education, and the way you guys have integrated it through sports, through play, through your community, I think those are all some fantastic ways to integrate it. So my question to you guys is, what were some unexpected lessons that you've learned from implementing your programs, whether it's from the children, it's from the community, the educators, however it may be? What do you think were something that you didn't really expect to take away, but it's something that you learned anyway? So yeah.
Thank you so much, Rashmi. Can I get really brief answers? Unfortunately, time is flying when you're having a good time.
I'll jump in, Rashmi. It's really nice to meet you. Thank you for the question. I think one of the biggest surprises I've seen is initially when parents don't engage. So we'll try and get parents engaged with learning, or just, coming to a parent-teacher conference, or any kind of thing. And usually the parents that you need to see the most are the parents that don't turn up. And it's, the parents of the children who are doing exceptionally well or like thriving at school. And those are the parents that come, and you see that link, obviously, between involved parents and not. But when we started doing the mindfulness activities with children, so when we started doing yoga, breath work, gratitude, affirmations, we found that parents started to get really curious and really engaged, and they started asking for sessions for themselves too. So we built a parenting program out of that so that parents and children alike could experience the mindfulness together. And that the transformation between parent engagement before that and after was phenomenal. And that really surprised me, is that the parents needed it. I mean, I don't think it's surprising that the parents needed it, but how much they wanted to engage in, not in literacy or numeracy or cognitive skills or reading. It was, they wanted the benefits of the mindfulness components as well. And that in turn led to benefits for the children. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
That does. Thank you so much.
For us, it has been how sports is a big tool to break the barriers. That has been key. When you come to, we're running sports tournaments. When you come to the sports tournaments, the family members out of school children, they were all invited to come in. And during that sports, you would create informal environments where people can interact and critique things. And because our sports-based empowerment curriculum was designed in a way that you discuss the challenging themes at a community level, you would find learners, those that are underprivileged, the marginalized, starting to ask questions to the leaders and to those in authority and in power. And that created an environment where people can start off engaging in the often difficult, normal, traditional norms and settings. So it created that platform, which was another key thing that we learned.
Right, I see. Thank you.
I think for us, just adding on to my previous point, the ripple effect of what the learner was learning inside this learning space. These were refugee learners who had caregivers at home and siblings as well. So when they were doing these projects, parents had noted in when we had our showcase at the end of the program, how siblings were also picking up what the learners were doing at home and the kind of projects that they were making. So for example, learners creating an alphabet book so they can teach their younger siblings how to read the letters of the alphabet, and the ways that they were navigating their emotions, how they were able to name their emotions, but also before they were picking fights with their siblings at home. And parents were astonished that that came down so much, and they're actually navigating those feelings with the family and sharing that with everyone else at home.
Thank
Right,
you so
thank you.
much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Sorry, Rashmi. Thank you. Thank you so much. Super good question. And thanks, everybody. It was such a pleasure to hear about your experiences and your thoughts. Very much appreciate all of you doing the work that you do. All right, over to you, Jamie. Thanks.
Thanks, Anina, and thanks for this great panel discussion. Unfortunately, we have to move on to the next panel. We did get one question and has to do with neurodivergent learners, but I think that this might be really well addressed by the next panel discussion. And then if anyone has anything to add after we finish that panel discussion, then we can answer it then, if that sounds good to you. Okay, great. So now we have our second panel discussion, which features 3 more innovators who are also working on supporting student well-being. Specifically, this panel discussion will be about the role of schools in supporting students. So I will pass this over to Anina.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So we will move on to the how of well-being next. Although we did hear quite a few great practical examples also in the previous panel, but in this one, we ask, how can we support student well-being in an increasingly uncertain and changing world? And how do we do this at our own local level? I'd like to welcome Dr. Gitanjali, almost forgot the middle letter, Govindrajan from Arts and Practices for Inclusion, Ondine, Bullot from Wisdom, World of Emotions, and Jennifer Corriero from Connected North. Oh my God, someone's tongue is getting on a knot. It's getting late in here in Helsinki. Could you all introduce yourself very briefly again by sharing what one thing you have done today to improve your own well-being? And also people in the audience, you can also type your answers in the chat. And whoever feels like going first can go first.
I could go first. I think what I did today was got my drum out and did a little bit of drumming. I think that was what I did.
Wonderful.
I called a friend because I was having a hard time. So I asked for advice. Asking for help is an important skill.
For me, I watched the sunrise and I did a lot of stretches and I just journaled a bit as well.
Really great practices. Go team. So in this panel, we aim to dig deeper into the how. And how do we know we have succeeded in our endeavors to improve well-being at school? Or how does improved well-being at a school level even look like in your mind? Could I hear your thoughts, your experiences? And I wonder if you could, Jennifer, if you could go first.
Sure. For me, I see it as social connectedness. Well-being is when students don't feel isolated, teachers don't feel isolated, administrators don't feel isolated, and also the school itself, when it's connected to the community, locally and globally. And there's many ways that can be fostered, but that the relationships within the cycles of learning are filled with respect, and kindness.
I love that. Maybe Gitanjali, you go next.
I think improved well-being in school is very evident when students feel emotionally safe, engaged, connected, when teachers feel well equipped to integrate emotional intelligence into learning, parents are actively supporting well-being at home. In such an environment, students are confidently able to express their emotions. You see less of anxiety. There's no fear in learning. Teachers experience less burnout. There are creative methods in which students are taught to learn. And I think that would be the way we would look at improved well-being. And to answer your question on how does one measure success, I think well-being is a shared responsibility. So if it is not seen like an intervention, but it is seen almost everywhere through leadership, through if everybody is embodying that, where it begins with taking care of oneself from the educator and the facilitator, then the measure of success would be that, where there's good attendance, lesser disciplinary cases that we're handling, then you know that it's just thriving in schools.
Wonderful. Anything to add to that, Ondine?
Yeah, I think it's also seeing expressions of joy, curiosity, kids wanting to share about their lives, their cultures, their challenges, and feeling safe to do that. Also, like exhibiting self-control and patience, which take longer to learn and develop.
Super. How do you see the role of schools in supporting all of this? Like, what do you think is the teacher's role or the school leader's role in your opinion? And if you have any examples from your own work, we'd love to hear those too. So, and then could you start this time? We'll reverse the order.
Sure. For me, schools are responsible for the macro environment. So, for example, making sure that there are rules and guidelines and consequences, clear communication channels between parents, families, teachers, and the administrators, basically providing the safe space and establishing all these rules, making sure that parents and teachers have resources and feel supported. I would say that's one aspect. The second aspect is making sure that schools are aware and informed of the changes that occur in society, in technology, and raising the awareness of those potential dangers and opportunities, and sharing the research with the parents and with the teachers to make sure that they themselves can then provide the tools and support to children on a daily life.
Okay, I can jump in. So schools I see as a place, first off, that students want to go. Like if it's a place that students are happy to go to, they look forward to going to this place, that is the role, is to create a place that students want to be at. And then the role of teachers I see as facilitators of access to resources, to knowledge, to opportunities, not to be expected to know it all. In our work with the Connected North program, we allow teachers to book virtual field trips for students so they can take students on journeys to places that they might not otherwise have access to just due to the remote locations that we serve in northern remote Indigenous communities. So I see the role of teachers as a bridge and reaching out to also see the strengths of their students and the interests of their students and help bring that to life. So nurturing those strengths, seeing what the students have to offer. So not seeing students as lacking, but actually having so much and finding ways for them to build on their talents.
Thank you so much. How about you, Gitanjali?
Yeah. So schools have a very important role to play in not just functioning as academic institutions, but also I think in investing in the social emotional health of children today. And I would place the role that schools play today to be much greater than the role of any other influence in a child's life, because there's so much that happens there. So for us to look at well-being, one is talking about creating safe spaces within schools, spaces where there are creative dialogue circles. Students are able to express their emotions, they're able to navigate through them. And teachers, I think, as rightly said by Jennifer, need to make that change between being an educator to a facilitator. How can I facilitate and hold the space? How can we model that kind of empathy and self regulation? What is my investment in my own well being? Because I feel a session, a class, a classroom, a lesson belongs as much to the facilitator as to the child. So it is a equal stakeholder model here. And if you're able to do that, and if teachers are able to, kind of invest starting from that space, then I think this is like an automatic, not a one-off, but it's just in the culture, it's in the DNA of the how the school thinks, it's in the priority of how schools think. So I think, yeah.
You almost kind of answered my next question, so I don't know. We'll see if you have things to add on. But when we talk about well-being, we often, or when we think about it, we often react late, and then we end up putting down fires. And I think one of the kind of biggest questions is like, how could we shift from this sort of a symptom mitigation towards a more systematic prioritization of student well-being? And kind of answer that in your, but do you any thoughts on this one? Maybe Jennifer, Ondine, you can build on whatever was said just a minute ago.
Yeah, I think that we can establish more support networks and community partnerships. There is a rise in teacher burnout, especially in Canada. At least I can't say for the whole world, but especially since the pandemic. And there's such a critical importance to support mental health. But as you said, rather than deal with issues after they've become acute, how do we promote health and well-being? And I think that we need to be careful about how much we're expecting of like one teacher in a class. And the more that we can establish support networks and community partnerships to enrich learning, the better. Also, in the Connected North program, we emphasize having Indigenous role models for Indigenous students, and then also seeing more pathways. So beyond K-12 education, we do virtual campus tours with colleges and universities, and then have students or alumni of different programs speak about their experience. So students can foster a sense of hope for the future, but also see people that they can relate to, and that there's many possible futures and there's no linear path. So it's about having the skills to have goals and overcome challenges and be adaptable and flexible, also through real world projects, developing those skills and not feeling like you're just trying to be perfect and fit some sort of mold.
Wonderful. Takes a village, this kind of a communal approach. Love that. Ondine, anything to add to
I
these
think
thoughts?
for us, there was a clear pre and post-COVID era. Before COVID, when we worked in schools in the US and around the globe, we had to explain and convince people that social emotional learning was important. And now I think it's very much the reverse. So before it was like, oh, there's one student in my classroom who has really challenging behaviors. You know, what can I do? And today it's like, all the kids have, you know, listening and social skills issues. How can we teach them how to make friends and, you know, show empathy? So I think there's been a shift in everybody's mind that the world is more and more uncertain and challenges, you know, life is made of challenges, and unfortunately these start earlier and earlier. And I think one takeaway for us in terms of, you know, how to make it more systematic is make it fun and make it playful. Our approach at Better Kids is teaching social emotional skills through play, both through digital games and hands-on activities. So make kids want to learn about feelings when they're not themselves overwhelmed with, you know, anger or sadness. Because of course those moments are very, very hard to teach anything. So that has been our approach.
Super, thank you so much. I now see that our youth ambassador, Karub, is here. Could you switch on your camera? Sorry if I pronounce your name wrong. Can you please introduce yourself real quick and then shoot away your question?
Hi, I'm Tarub Mundla, and I'm a ninth grader from Lebanon. And all of your innovations, from Better Kids to Connected North, and then also I don't know how to pronounce the name of your innovation, but all of these really stress on the importance of diversity and inclusivity to tackle well-being in education. And so my question to you guys is, how does acceptance and empathy in the school community play a role in a student's holistic education? And how can your innovations help ensure that these practices are standardized?
What a wonderful question. Thank you so much. And now I'll ask all our panelists to answer quite briefly, because yet again, we're running out of time. Next time, 2 hours. Whoever feels like going first can go first.
Sure. I think for us, as I was started explaining, play is a really great way to make the kids feel that they belong and that they want to share. So we make sure that we design our games in a way that is inclusive of people with special needs like autism, ADHD, ADD, by designing with UDL principles. Also incorporating students' feedback. That has been a key on our end to make sure that, you know, acceptance and empathy is shared among them, as well as promoting a common language. So for example, for coping strategies, we say, you know, do you want to use your superpowers? And superpowers are a lot more exciting to use than coping strategies. Making sure that language is shared by parents and teachers and students themselves has been efficient.
I think from the innovation arts practices for inclusion, which is our innovation, I think the crux of this is to say, how do we look at arts, which is music, movement, dance, storytelling, drama, theater, as a language that creates a space where people feel belonged, where there is a sense of togetherness. And when there is a space of togetherness and belongingness, there's freedom of choice, freedom given to participate or not, with opportunities created for everyone, then that relationship itself is quite therapeutic. And that therapeutic relationship is where inclusion thrives, where diversity thrives. So I feel that giving the one size fits all methodology of this is how every child needs to respond is not going to work. And we don't need any more data to, kind of even accept the idea that a happy learner is going to learn. Happy people are going to be accepted. There is empathy. So I think it becomes important to start examining the way in which this is being imparted. And I feel that then acceptance and empathy are not just taught as skills and a one-off empathy hour and happiness hour, but it just becomes a part of the way one can be. And I feel arts plays a very important role in doing that in a very non-threatening and in a very, in a very easy and in a very accessible fashion.
Well, what I have to add is gaining perspectives from different people allows you to gain empathy, because if you can see a situation from different perspectives, you're more likely to gain that sense of understanding. You're more likely to have collaborative problem solving instead of like a tension or a conflict, because you don't understand where that person is coming from. So I think exposure to different perspectives is very important in fostering empathy.
Thank you so much, everybody, and thanks for a wonderful question, Taroub. I think it summarized this convo really well, so thanks for joining us. And at this point, I have to say thank you. It was wonderful having this chat with you, and I'll move it over to Jamie.
Yeah, maybe while I still have you, we can pull one question quickly from the chat. There's a question about well-being of neurodivergent learners in alternative education settings. The question is, how do you see well-being of neurodivergent learners in your learning environments?
I'd like to go because the center works with neurodivergent individuals itself. And like I had explained earlier, the methodology with which we choose to engage or enter into the world of people who are different, who think differently, who feel differently, lends itself to how they learn. So for us, I think arts has been a very important tool where there is a space for everybody to participate, be it a child who's nonverbal, be it a child who's wheelchair bound, be it somebody who's visually impaired, be it children in the spectrum. Because I think for a lot of children in the autism spectrum, the way they perceive the world may be different, but the way they navigate in what they would like to communicate requires a tool. So I have seen in our experience of the last 20 plus years that children thrive when they're given opportunities to learn at their own space. And the buffet of the arts with every art form, I think, lends itself quite automatically, where you get your pace, you're not threatened to participate. We're not measuring success by an outcome of how you've solved a problem, but how you've regulated your emotions. How has theater allowed you to navigate through your emotions? How have you enhanced your receptive communication, even if you're nonverbal? I think these have been, arts is what I would say plays a very big tool, and it allows and there's space for everybody. And I think one needs to look at it like that. And also, what is my relationship with neurodivergence itself? How does it teach me to celebrate diversity, celebrate differences? Yeah, that would be my answer.
Yeah. What I would like to add, building on art, is the aspect of hands-on learning experiences, and also just understanding how all of the learners learn best and trying to build on their strengths in that way. There was also a few points in the chat talking about getting outside and land-based learning and, growing food. And yeah, so those are all other great examples of learning, not just within the walls of a classroom, but really going outside as well and having experiences, adventures, and having memories. So having memories together can allow the learner to have a reference point and feel that what they're learning is relevant. But of course, with neurodivergent learners, each learner is going to have different needs. So it will be important to understand what they need and not make overgeneralizations, of course.
One last point would be not to think of the adaptations for neurodiverse learners as applying only to them, but being aware that any adaptations that work for them will work for all the other student population as well, and benefit everyone in the end.
Great. Thank you so much. Those were great answers. So unfortunately, that's all the time we have for the additional questions, but thank you so much for being part of this panel discussion. All right, now I have the pleasure of introducing Olli-Pekka Heinonen, the Director General of the IB, and Michael Stevenson, the Senior Consultant of the OECD, to just wrap up the conversation that we've had today. Yeah, so could you please conclude and just let us know, what did you take away from the conversation today?
Well, maybe Olli-Pekka, I'll kick off but get the ball to you as quickly as I can. I'll tell you what I loved about the conversation. It just put the word happiness right in the middle from the start. I mean, I think you look at education over the last 75 years, the period when governments really professionalized it, happiness was a very distant cousin of education. And I think now we're seeing it as the close sister of education, and that's a remarkable thing. And happiness, not just in terms of how you feel in a well-run school, but happiness is something you can learn to do and to feel at the very heart of your learning experience. So I think that's so powerful. And in work that Olli-Pekka and I have been involved in, which we call, because you've got to call it something, high-performing systems for tomorrow, we've developed a kind of way of thinking about happiness in terms of the purposes of education. We feel that for too long, though nobody says it, the purpose of education has been education for jobs, for employment, but it's time for education to be in the service of human flourishing. And we've thought about human flourishing's dimensions, happiness, but also meaning, relationships, accomplishment, however you define that. We thought about new competencies, could be adaptive problem solving, could be ethical reasoning, could be understanding the world, appreciating the world, acting in the world. And we thought about how all of that links back to the stuff we have to keep on doing, maths and science and reading. But in the middle of all that thinking is this concept of happiness, where the foundations are not just, the traditional ones, but they are the well-being factors and they are the social and emotional skills. So I heard so much in your conversation and both of the panels that seemed to be urging governments in that direction. Though last thought, you don't need governments, you're doing it yourself, you're doing it on the ground. And in a way, it's the governments that need to catch up and almost validate this new way of doing things. But Olli-Pekka, I don't know whether you recognize that story as something you and I, with others, have been talking about in recent years.
I definitely, Michael, did. I fully agree what you said about the happiness and how that joy of learning came so strongly through, and that being a big part of the well-being in schools and the question that how school cultures are created. I had kind of three takes from what I heard in the discussions. The first one was that, because the examples came from very different contexts, and at the same time, there were certain things that seemed to be quite similar. That some of the ways to integrate and what is seeming meaningful when talking about the well-being of students and educators was quite similar in different contexts. But there was also that important notion that we need to listen to the community, because in that community is the wisdom that what impacts negatively and positively the well-being of young people in that culture. and how that wisdom is brought as part of the school activities culture. The second point I took was the kind of social element of well-being, that we are social beings, and the way that we're capable of connecting with each other, how important that is. And then the inclusivity, not letting isolation happen in schools becomes so important, and how can you do things together? There were the ideas and the examples of I think it was Harold was talking about football, and then the arts, the theater, the dancing, things that we do get together and we feel humans together is so important as when we talk about how we feel whole. And that's a big part of well-being. And the third one was it came in the very beginning of the discussion that one of the challenges is that clash between the academic curriculum and well-being. And that's a really interesting one that we need to tackle in our education systems. And then it's about the question that how to combine, also it was said in the panel, that how to combine the academic aims with well-being. That how can you do that? It was clearly that it should not be outside the curriculum, but on the curriculum it should not be a separate 30-minute slot, but it should be truly integrated. And then we are talking really about the school culture and the ability, the way that the school is led as a whole, and what it values and what it has as an aim. And also the idea that well-being is not kind of something that it would mean that you're lowering the bar with other aims of learning, but it's to have the right size challenges for students so that they are motivational and they are capable of being reached. So that kind of things that I'm very humbly learning from this session, and thinking about ways that how can we integrate them in more and more schools, what the great panelists shared with us.
Yes, yes. Two other things which relate to what you said lodge with me, Olli-Pekka, just as we close maybe. One is that this is best when it's local. I mean, of course, well-being is a dimension of national education policy. Well, it may not have been enough, but it is going to be, I think, in future. But when this comes to life, it's just like the panelists were saying, it comes to life in the local setting. And here I am just outside of Bogota and Medellin, where I see an incredible local learning ecosystem called Fundación Mi Sangre, young people sitting down with employers, politicians, former guerrillas in the Civil War, informal and non-formal ways, learning together and solving things. The other thing that came out to me from the conversation was that little discussion of measurement, because it stays important. We want to do measurement in better ways than we've done in the past, I think. But I was just having a conversation over breakfast here with a guy who's really interested in measuring through play, and the play that 5-year-olds do. And it struck me that we have so much to learn about how we want to measure well-being, and we're probably facing a revolution in terms of how we go about that. So those are the things that I take from this very, very rich conversation today, and I'm so grateful to have had the chance to listen in.
Thank you so much for this concluding remarks. I don't think I could have said it any better. Thanks for the summary, and thanks for giving us so much to think about, to the panelists, to Olli-Pekka, and to Michael Stevenson. So that is the end of the webinar. That's all the time that we have for today. I just wanted to remind everyone that's interested in this topic that this webinar was part of this Spotlight project, Wellbeing in Schools, that we have just concluded in collaboration with IB. So if you are interested in learning more about the innovations that were on the panel discussion today, and there are also more since we selected 15, I would really highly encourage you to go on our website and to download the Spotlight report to learn more about it, and also to continue the conversation. We didn't have much time for questions, but please, if you have any unanswered questions, you can reach out to the HundrED research team at research@hundred.org, or we can continue the conversation maybe on LinkedIn, which is where people love to have conversations nowadays. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us for this webinar, and hope to see you at the next one.